Hello, guys. Welcome to the Buddha Belly Life podcast. This is the month of May. Okay, we're dropping this in May 2024. In this month, we are going to be covering an in-depth look of the brain-gut connection and how gut markers are actually great data for identifying or making sense of a lot of mental health challenges and brain function. Okay, this includes things like anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, etc. So if you're new to the podcast, I'm Coach Britt. I'm author of Buddha Belly, a mind, body, soul approach to health starting with your gut. And I'm the founder of the Gut Health School, HWCA. So where we train health coaches from around the world in holistic gut health and the brain-gut connection. So what I want to do for you guys today is I want to give you just an idea. If you're new, even if you're not new, if you don't know this, mental health is my passion. Brain function and behavior are really, really interesting to me, and they're really powerful to me because they literally, lay out the quality of our life and how we function, how we interact with people, how we experience life, if we're resilient or not, our behaviors, if we are self-critical, if we are, unhealthy in certain ways, right? If we self-sabotage or things like that, we have power, and that is in our own mind and hopefully over our own bodies and our own choices. And so getting a healthy brain or maintaining a healthy brain is really essential, aside from just mindset, right? Mindset is like a choice of perspective. It's choosing to be introspective, to grow, to think a certain way, to reframe thought patterns. But brain function is another thing. And you can have great mindset with crappy brain function. And so we're going to talk about some of this. And this is why mental health and all health in general, I think, is very multifaceted. This is why we refer to it as holistic, mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical, because it absolutely is. So brain function is so important especially because a lot of my audience is health and wellness coaches and people in the wellness professions or interested in them. Okay, if you have somebody with a low functioning brain, they're going to be a difficult client. Okay, and this isn't because they don't want to help themselves or they want to continue to suffer. But the thing is that the brain is responsible for so much. We've got energy, we've got motivation, we've got executive function. So even just planning and execution, or what people call discipline. Okay, they always refer to willpower. I mean, I really hate a lot of these words actually, because they're really action words. They're not really foundational function words. Okay, so if a person lacks motivation, okay, who's to say that they are just lacking something that someone else has? If a person they're very motivated and somebody else is not motivated, okay, well, maybe one person has a really healthy functioning brain, or maybe the opposite. Maybe they have an overactive brain that doesn't give them a rest much. And then maybe you have someone else with a very lower functioning brain, a slower central nervous system response. Okay. And this can happen. This is why we refer to things like brain fog. We see this a lot, especially in women with hormone connections. Okay. Different times of the month, times of life, etc. We see hormonal ties. We see it with burnout. Okay. The nervous system is burnt out. We'll see it with brain burnout. So a lot of these words like motivation and, discipline and, effort are not taking into consideration just basic function. We don't need to worry about a person's motivation, etc. We just need to worry about their brain function and if they want it bad enough. So brain function and mindset, this is what's going to tell me a lot anytime I work with somebody, right? So if they've got a mindset that's really victim-y, that's like, hey, just do this for me. Can I just pay you and get XYZ? Just tell me what to do and blah, 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 right? That tells me right there that they're not ready yet. And maybe it's not because they don't want it bad enough or because they're lazy or something like that. Just maybe their brain's functioning on a low level and they're in an extreme state of overwhelm. Okay. And in a state of overwhelm, they're probably not going to be able to execute a lot of executive functions like, the disciplined habits and some of that stuff, right? The way paying attention to how a brain functions and how a person functions is just really imperative when working with anybody, especially ourselves even. Okay, this is going to apply to us as individuals all day long. but it's really important in just understanding people. I think in our society, we're way too quick to just label and write people off, to compare people, to compare ourselves to other people. And we don't understand the uniqueness of our own individuality, of our own health, our own brain-body connection, and of our own function. Okay, so you guys, that is why it is so important, because our quality of life is literally determined by the quality of our brain. And the quality, chances are, if we have a low functioning brain, and I don't mean this like you're stupid, right? Like you're unintelligent. Okay, this is just low function. Like we have low, as my brain's not functioning today, right? Like I can't pull my words for the life of me. It's been a long week. So to my point, okay, if you have low neurotransmitter function, okay, these are things like serotonin, dopamine, GABA, like all this stuff, you guys, in this hormonal orchestra helps really do things. It revs you up when you need, it calms you down when you need, it gets you ready for rest. And this synergy is so important. So when that's not functioning well, we're not getting the right function. And this is why you'll see people, or maybe you've experienced people that'll be, tired but wired, right? Like they're exhausted all the time, but they can't sleep well. How does that make sense, right? If you're so exhausted, you should be sleeping once you get a chance. So this is a good example of that. They can't think straight, but yet can't shut their brain off, okay? This is just a lot of stuff gone awry. And so the connection to the gut is so important, because the quality that our brain is functioning is ultimately probably going to determine the quality of our life and experiences. No matter how hard we try, if our brain is functioning low and we are exhibiting, cognitive decline, anxiety, depression, excessive overwhelm, ADHD exacerbated, things like that, things like sensory overload, all of these things, we understand enough conditions now, like ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, anxiety, depression, things like that. But what we don't understand is that there's still a way that even if a person has some of these things or has even been diagnosed, that they can function at a higher level because they're nurturing that brain right. They're getting good neurotransmitter functionality, maybe good, cellular regeneration, in their brain neurons and things like that. And so they'll be functioning a lot better. And so what we'll see less of those exacerbated symptoms. Like with ADHD, you'll see a person be much more calm, potentially maybe better able to set themselves up for success, etc. When they're really wonked out, right? When their nervous system is really revved up, maybe if their brain's not in being taken care of well through some of the things we're going to talk about right now, then you'll see exacerbation of these conditions and a lot of the symptoms that come along with them. And these can be detrimental to our life and to our environment, to ourselves, to the people around us, to the goals we want to have and the things we want to do and the way we want to live. So brain function is just so important. And what's crazy is that if we're struggling with some kind of brain function, then we are struggling with a level of body function, because really it does come from the internal body most of the time. In fact, the gut is the epicenter for neurotransmitters and brain function. So but in that pathway, that vagus nerve, that brain gut connection, 80% of the communication along the vagus nerve, which is the main nerve from brain to gut, 80% of that is from gut to brain. So 80% of that communication is coming from the gut, and it is affecting the brain. And we know that if the gut is out of whack, if it's got dysbiosis, if it's leaky, etc., then it's going to be also inflaming the body. We'll see it right there. We'll see a tie with inflammation. And these inflammation markers, you guys, like we talk about constantly, is inflammation is connected to every single kind of disease that's out there. Well, what we also know is the brain now has its own sort of like a gut barrier. It's called the blood-brain barrier. And it was thought for a long time that this was airtight. Nothing could get through it. And we realized it's not. It is semi-permeable. And when in distress, when constantly inflamed in a body where there is inflammation and stuff going on, that blood-brain barrier will become leaky. So you'll start seeing stuff seep into the brain area too and affect our inflammation in the brain, let alone with the brain gut connection, the neurotransmitter function. So there's a lot. So what we're talking about too is that's the gut brain connection. So what this can look like. So through getting to where we are now at an advanced state of being able to use things like DNA microbiome testing, stool analysis, we can see a lot within the gut. And what this may look like, okay, we can actually see, I'm moving here if anybody's following me on video, okay, because I got notes. What this may look like, okay, there's some markers. If a person is struggling with anxiety, depression, even brain function, cognitive decline, some of these things, there's often some markers that we can see. Now, we may not look at something and say, this specific gut bacteria, this person probably has, dementia. I mean, maybe a little bit, okay, but we're going to be able to see like brain function. So how it shows itself with an individual can be determined, can come into play with what their genetic predispositions are and things like that, their age, their experiences, et cetera, right? Because life experiences do affect brain. Well, don't ever discount trauma and things like that. But what's crazy is that even with things like trauma and PTSD, they've shown lower rates of PTSD in people who have a healthier gut microbiome. So there's certain bacteria markers that we see actually too in people that tend to have more long-term effects of trauma and have it more affect their mental health and their brain. Okay, so what this may look like. So it may be certain bacteria that we see linked to excessive inflammation, to neurotransmitter function, especially things like GABA, okay, the calming neurotransmitters and stuff like that, okay? But especially inflammation. So if a person looks like they're pulling signs on their tests of inflammation, then there's a good chance that it can be attributed to whatever they're struggling with their brain function. And what's unfortunate is that a lot of people wait way too long. This is why it's important. The best way I say to pay attention to stuff like this, sometimes brain function will be your first alarm signal, okay? For me, excessive anxiety and depression and stuff like that was my numero uno. It stuck out more than anything else in my life at a very young age. But for some people, maybe it's something else. Maybe you have some GI distress. Maybe you've got, inflammation like joint pain and achiness that's all the time. Maybe you have irregular cycles, horrible PMS. Maybe you've got skin conditions going on, lots of cystic acne or breakouts. There's can be so many things. And the thing is all of these things, we would come back to the gut and we would say there's probably some dysbiosis or some a lack of certain, diversity in the gut and certain bacteria that are of our commensal species that are really necessary for helping us thrive. It's still going to come back to the gut. So the thing is that sometimes mental health or brain health will be our first indicator. Sometimes it may be one of our last. And the thing is that if it's a later onset thing for someone, it may catch them by surprise because it could be like, I've never struggled with anxiety or depression, and now all of a sudden I am. And this is why it's really important. Why wait for it to get bad? Why wait for it to get to that point? Paying attention to gut issues, even especially outside of typical GI distress, is so important because it can set us up for success in all these other areas. Obviously with like mental health and all that too, okay? So this is something to look for, okay? So obviously if we were going to do a gut test, if we were going to pull a biome test, and these are totally available. In fact, all of my graduate coaches know how to run these. I run them occasionally for people now, but I usually just obviously work with coaches. But you can find more information on that at buddhabellylife.com. You can contact us, request stuff, or theguthealthschool.com, hwcacoach.com. If you're interested in looking into these gut tests. But what this may look like there is dysbiosis issues, obviously. So we're going to see higher incidences of some of what we would call gram-negative gut bacteria that have a lot of inflammatory markers. We're going to see maybe lower diversity. So there's going to be less, fighters in the community there that are working for our favor. We're going to see maybe more food sensitivities. Like if we're just going to go off symptoms, a person might have more food sensitivities. It is not unlikely that their mental health or any kind of brain complaints are going to accompany other things that are all gut related when you finally draw it back to that. That's why understanding the gut is so important in like every single type of niche or profession in wellness, I feel like, because it all really does come back to this. But in kids, okay, this is one I really want to talk about too, because in children, this can look different. Okay, first of all, I'm not a professional, I'm just a coach, but I'm giving you some advice because I was a child that struggled with horrid anxiety and depression. Okay, I first started missing school because of my depression, and I think it was the second grade. Okay, and I would say my tummy hurt, and this isn't ironic. It's because there is that connection to excessive anxiety and stress in the gut, or maybe there's issues with the gut that is causing and leading to some of this brain function, and mental health stuff. We don't always know which comes first, the chicken or the egg, but we know that they hold hands and they work together all the time. And eventually they will affect each other either way, no matter where it starts. So especially with kids, you guys, it's really important to pay attention to some of the things they say. If they show a lot of angst about a lot of things, excessive worry. I think so often we want to comfort our kids by just saying, hey, don't worry about that. Not a big deal. Hey, go back to bed. What do you mean? Or we question them. And if they don't give us a good answer, then we kind of write it off. Maybe it's easy to do that. I feel like that's what happened to me. But as a parent, we need to pay attention because there's a lot of markers, and you can please do your research on some of this too, when it comes to psychology, or consult some professionals, because we need to pay attention to our kids. I mean, I just can't advocate for that enough. Obviously, we need to pay attention to our friends and our family and our partners and our neighbors as well. But children are so innocent, and they are really up against a lot right now, and for multiple reasons, which I'm going to get into. But they could have had kind of the crap end of the stick from some early life introductions that mess with their gut microbiome. Okay. So some of these things that mess with the gut in early life are, C-section delivery. Okay. Most babies born by C-section are not swabbed. This is a process where you swab the birth canal and add it to the baby, since the baby didn't get to come through the birth canal. Most people aren't doing this. Doctors don't tell anybody this. So these C-section babies are not even coming in contact with gut bacteria. They get these highly, highly important, powerful commensal species are obtained moving through the birth canal of mom. So when baby misses that by coming through C-section and they're not swabbed, then they're starting out kind of with the shit end of the stick. Honestly, they're not going to get the best setup right off the bat. Okay. Now don't feel guilty if this was you or this is your kid. This is just important information to know so that we can repair, restore, do something about it. Right. Okay. So second, then there's the breastfeeding process. Breastfeeding is then what feeds those species. So even if though, let's say a baby was a C-section baby and they didn't get all those good species, but then they're breastfed for like 2 solid years, they could really make up maybe for some of that, maybe not completely, but there could be some makeup for that because the breast milk is not only prebiotic, where it's going to feed the gut bacteria, but it's also can be probiotic as well. So they're going to keep getting that reinoculation. And that's why babies, they don't tend to maybe not get sick. They'll either get sick a ton or not at all, right? But when they're breastfeeding, they have the most immunity coming into their body at once, even though they're more fragile because they don't have a built immune system yet. This is kind of nature's way of giving them that. So whether or not a kid was breastfed, we're going to see that. And then their first foods, obviously. Okay. So depending on then if their gut is fed with nutrition or not, depending on if they've eaten more processed foods or they've been introduced to things like, even a lot of like whole milk and stuff like that that's highly pasteurized. Sometimes this is really rough on their guts too. So this isn't a whole episode just on infancy and guts, okay? But a little bit of that is kind of important to understand. And one of the biggest things, guys, too, aside from the birth process, the biggest things is antibiotic use. So if you have a kid that has been prescribed antibiotics, especially before age 2, there's a good chance that they need gut repair. They need some really good intentional focus on putting that gut back together because antibiotics decimate the environment. They don't just kill bad bacteria or gram negative. They kill a lot of the gram positive. And unfortunately, those positive commensal species grow back slower than the ones that cause us a lot of distress, okay? So when the bad guys can grow back so much faster, that means they get to take over the ecosystem, and we don't want that. And this happens for a lot of kids, especially if they've been on antibiotics before age 2. Recovery from early life antibiotic usage can actually be incredibly difficult. So if that is your kid, if that's you, if that's a part of your story, please pay attention because we can't discount how this can be playing into the later, early on now mental health epidemic that we're seeing amongst our teens and our kids. This is critical information. and it could be a gut related issue. So then, yeah, they live in a world with tons of processed foods and artificial dyes. They live in a world, we live in a world with a lot of external stressors. And now, guys, our kids, all right, and I speak for myself as well, but our kids are on social media or tablets or phones or technology. And this is messing with the brain as well, because it is providing all this excessive stimulation. It's overstimulating parts of the brain that are trying to develop. It's overstimulating a nervous system. And we're having issues then with neurotransmitters. We're having issues with natural dopamine release and things like that, because they're getting all this artificial to such an extent that it's like a high drug. Then without it, they just don't have it. And so this is having horrible effects, let alone being sedentary if you're doing these things, right? So these are a multitude of ways that this stuff is that our kids' brains are affected. So when we're going back to the drawing board with anybody saying, how do we look, work on your brain health, or even preventatively with our kids, like please work. If you can do anything. I mean, of course we don't want to see our kids have diseases and diabetes and all that. But often I think if our kids aren't overweight, and they seem fine, then we tend to write off what could really be going on inside their bodies. And we tend to not see, mental health until it's gotten bad and we feel really lost in it. So if you can do something ahead of time, the gut is a great place to pay attention to this, you guys. Gut health will benefit every single person, everybody in your family from the get-go, okay? And there's simple ways that you can introduce things like this without going full bore. Okay, so what to implement. Here's some things. Here's just some basic things. If you really extra brain function, okay, there's a few things that we can add more of in our life, okay, that are going to make it better. So omega-3 fatty acids, okay, healthy fishes, take a supplement, something like that. This can be good for like neurogeneration and things like that. And protecting of like the myelin and the brain and a lot of that function. Diversify fibers. We got to find fiber. Okay. Like most people, you guys, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I think adequate fiber can still be a hard part of my diet. I eat incredibly clean. I follow very gut healthy food, eating patterns for like almost all my meals every single day. But because I do that, because I don't do a lot of excess carbohydrates and things like that, it can be a lot harder for me to get in the amount of fiber that I really want, or diversify it. Here's the thing too, is because there's different kinds of fibers in certain vegetables versus certain fruits versus maybe some non-processed starches and stuff like that. Because we were really meant to be more grazers, right? We were going to eat, what was around us. So adding things in that can be more fibrous, bring more fiber. I obviously put a veggie with every meal, and I try and do almost half my plate in vegetables. Okay. Like having some things like carrots and maybe some fruit or berries around for snacks for your kids is a great way to include some of that too. If they can tolerate it, maybe gluten-free oatmeal and stuff like that. So you don't want it to come with the glyphosate and all that stuff as well. But sweet potatoes and stuff. I mean, just like start researching your fibers and figure out how we can just add some more here and there. Certain flax seeds and stuff like that. This can be really great for brain. And these are actually things, you guys, that are really simple. They kind of introduce some of the same effects as Ozempic. So I know everyone, people are talking now about this weight loss drug, and obviously don't even get me started on it. But there's a lot of things in nature that simulate some of these same things. So adding these healthy fibers, even for our kids, finding recipes even maybe where we can, make healthier like bars or muffins or something out of really whole food ingredients and fiberify them and more whole foods. The more we can add that, the better. Obviously, good quality probiotics are great too. So if you can get that too, which like I said, you can find out more about this on BuddhaBellyLife.com. We do have protocols that you guys can access. In fact, if you use code podcast May for this month, you're going to get our Buddha Belly protocol is usually just under $300, but you're going to get a code for $100 off that. And if you want, if you do that, we're going to send you the book. You're going to have access to the course for a whole year and all this stuff that's going to help you kind of on how to cultivate gut health. So whether it's for you or your kids, but especially for brain function, this is what got me into gut health. It's what will keep me in gut health is brain function. Okay. It's so cool that it happens to increase your metabolism most of the time. A healthy gut is going to reduce inflammation and joint pain. It is going to make you more resilient to stress. It is going to lower your risks of disease and cancer and cognitive decline and all of these cool things, right? But mental health and brain function is what allows you to enjoy now. It's what allows you to have a peaceful life or a happy life. I like to say peaceful because it's not always happy, but a healthy life can experience a range of emotions. It can be resilient when we go through hard things. It can also sit still. Okay. How many of us can't sit still anymore? Or some of us are the latter. We can't get going. Okay. So it's really important with your brain health and with your brain function to start valuing that. And we can do a lot. They're calling our Alzheimer's now type 3 diabetes because it's showing up similarly and lifestyle correlated, just like type 2 diabetes. Okay. It has very similar patterns, which means even if we're genetically predisposed, there's so many factoids about our lifestyle that can either assist this in happening or prevent it from being our story. And the gut is where we start with all this, okay? So each individual gut's going to be a little bit different, and you guys really diving into this is going to be really important. But if you have somebody that you want to help with mental health, okay, having a great therapist, having a great counselor, seeking the professionals for things like that is really important. And then figuring out what you can do to support that gut biome. And if you want, what helps too sometimes is you can do a biome test and you can look at it. And sometimes when people see that on paper, they believe it. Because it's one thing to say, okay, we can work on your gut and maybe it'll help with your depression or your anxiety. But if we can look at a biome test, if we can look at a gut test and say, hey, we can see that you're producing low GABA, which is supposed to calm you down. We can see that a lot of the bacteria associated with neurotransmitter function is low. We can see, dysbiosis issues, which is probably going to show us that there's a lot of inflammation and dysbiosis going on, which is going to cause a lot of inflammation. So all these are really common markers that we see in people that tend to present with things like depression, anxiety, et cetera, cognitive decline. Okay, so this is really common and we see this. So we can use through strategic supplementation, lifestyle, and diet, we can come in here and we can start changing what shows up on that test. And you'd be shocked at how many times it improves this functionality. Okay. And obviously we do this in a multitude of areas. We can see it with hormone function. We can see it with skincare. Like I said, it's really a similar pathway to everything. But when a person is struggling with the brain, sometimes it's really hard for them to imagine that anything could do anything about that. And so sometimes seeing it on paper, like I said, seeing it in there, getting some of those facts, it really makes us feel less hopeless, which we need more of, because we need to not feel like this is a life sentence. Maybe they've even tried SSRIs and all these things, right? And didn't have great success with it, or the side effects weren't worth it. Now they're just like, well, what do I do? Or they just go from pill to pill. And, those can have their own outcomes and their own side effects and things on top of that. So whether or not that's your choice, we should absolutely be supporting the brain-gut connection. And the best way to do that is through the gut. So like I said, guys, follow it with code. So Podcast May is your code for $100 off the Buddha Belly Gut Restoration Program. Pretty soon, actually, we are going to launch an app and you'll be able to access the whole thing. It should be within the next month or so. It should be available on all for both Droid and iOS. And you can access this and you can get access to the podcast. You can get access to more additional education and information. For those coaches or anyone interested in becoming a coach, absolutely check out enrollhwca.com because we've got webinars and information on there. You can apply for a half-off scholarship for tuition. We are one of the most affordable and impactful, powerful, unique programs out there for health coaches because we want to see our coaches succeed. And we know that in order to do that, they need to understand the business aspect and they need to understand gut health and protocol and how to actually use that with clients. So hopefully there's some information for you guys. Everyone interested in the program or the gut restoration, BuddhaBellyLife.com. Thank you for joining us on this podcast, and I look forward to talking to you guys next time.